In early 2026, the digital vaults opened. The US government released a massive archive of previously sealed documents, crashing servers as millions rushed to access the portal. This release followed the Epstein Files Transparency Act. Passed in November 2025, the law mandated that the government provide public access to its internal files on the case. The Department of Justice published nearly 3.5 million pages of unclassified records, including 180,000 images and 2,000 videos. Online communities immediately began searching for a single rumored document, a clean spreadsheet that would name every visitor and participant in the network. An Associated Press fact check soon clarified that the 3.5 million pages consist of routine legal filings and depositions. The tidy, organized client list the public expected is nowhere in the release. The public had anticipated a clear summary. Instead, they were met with the chaotic, disorganized reality of raw court data. The identities unsealed by Judge Loretta Preska were pulled from a civil case. These files contain a complex web of abuse survivors, household staff, and litigation witnesses. Even without a specific list, the FBI seized archives contain evidence of long-term associations between the properties and several high-ranking political and financial figures. Just hours after the dump went live, 16 critical files vanished from the government portal. One of the removed records, File 468, reportedly contained a photograph of a former United States president alongside the central figures of the trafficking ring. This sudden removal of records suggests the data drop served as a strategic filter. By providing millions of pages while pulling specific files, the government created a vacuum where evidence could be erased. As files began to disappear, users realized the official portal was an unreliable source for the complete record. Open-source researchers responded by scraping every page and image from the government servers, creating a private mirror of the data before more deletions could occur. They organized these findings into a database called Epstein Exposed. This citizen-led platform was built to preserve and index the entire archive. The project required cross-referencing 2.1 million individual documents that had been released without a searchable index or clear structure. By securing the raw data on independent servers, these researchers ensured that the records remained accessible, even as the government portal was modified. This database treats every name or location as an interconnected node, turning 3.5 million pages into a searchable network. Flight logs are mapped against visitor records to verify contact timing. The software identified 51,000 connections, visualizing the operation's density in a single graph. The mapping confirmed celebrity connections that were previously documented only through anecdotal rumors. International figures in the music industry were clearly linked to the specific locations and dates identified in the trafficking logs. The network also secured links to the highest levels of political power, placing world leaders within the documented schedule of the trafficking ring. The volume of verified connections makes the argument for accidental or passing contact difficult to sustain. The data shows a highly systematic, repeated pattern of interaction. The most critical data points exist at the center of the web, far from the famous names on the periphery. This central cluster reveals the figures responsible for coordinating the logistics of the entire operation. These researchers found that the most valuable evidence was not found in flight logs, but in the specific details of unredacted legal depositions. While much of the public attention remained fixed on identifying famous names, the database was quietly indexing the mechanics of the trafficking ring itself. This map shifted the focus toward the functional reality of the abuse, ensuring that the details of the operation were not lost in the search for celebrity gossip. The database highlights the testimonies of staff members like House Manager Juan Alessi, who provided daily accounts of the property's operations. It also prioritizes the harrowing depositions of survivors like Johanna Schoberg, whose sworn accounts provide the emotional core of the files. These specific witness accounts provide the physical reality that a clinical data map cannot capture on its own. This transition to public databases represents a shift in record-keeping. When institutions delete files, the public can restore and verify them independently. By securing these records, open-source intelligence provides a persistent archive that exists beyond the reach of government redactions, ensuring the survivors' accounts remain part of the public record. The Department of Justice released 3.5 million pages of documents. They provided no index, no structural directory, and no searchable database. In data science, this tactic is known as obfuscation through volume. Releasing a massive, unstructured dataset creates the illusion of compliance while effectively burying the most critical information under raw noise. Standard investigative journalism breaks down at this scale. Scrolling through millions of intentionally degraded, flattened PDF images looking for familiar names is mathematically inefficient and practically impossible for human researchers. To extract actual signal from this manufactured static, open-source researchers deployed optical character recognition algorithms, converting the flattened image pixels back into machine-readable text. Parsing an archive of this size requires a dual framework approach. Investigators must map the structural network of the data that was released and systematically categorize the exact taxonomy of the files that were suppressed. Transparency without structural organization functions exactly like strict secrecy. The investigation begins with the only highly structured empirical dataset included in the dump, the unsealed flight manifests. This 3D spatial network shows the open-source intelligence process of converting linear passenger lists into an entity relationship graph. The algorithms map the data according to strict mathematical rules. The physical size of a node correlates directly to the frequency of flights taken, while the color coding categorizes the socio-political industry of the specific passenger. By automatically sorting raw names into defined clusters, the algorithm immediately isolates the most highly connected individuals from the background noise of secondary passengers and staff. Applying strict topological mapping to the flight logs replaces celebrity gossip with a quantifiable empirical map of institutional influence. This highlighted red cluster tracks the cultural and entertainment sector, which forms the most prominent, high-visibility outer ring of the mapped flight network. Extracting the specific data points within this sector verifies the presence of legacy music industry figures, notably Mick Jagger. Based on documented manifest appearances, the primary international diplomatic node anchoring this specific cluster is Prince Andrew. These high-visibility cultural and royal nodes functioned as social capital. Their frequent, visible participation provided an aura of legitimacy to the network's central operations. The algorithm reveals an even deeper layer when it isolates the single most statistically dense political node found within the entire unsealed flight database. The specific data point causing this massive topological anomaly is former executive Bill Clinton, whose name surfaced repeatedly across the logs. Once this data density was publicly mapped and circulated, executive offices immediately deployed high-level public relations countermeasures to manage the fallout. Spokespersons utilized a specific defense strategy, claiming the former president was merely used as a scapegoat and attempting to provide logical justifications for the high frequency of flights. That official mitigation strategy directly conflicts with the physical archival evidence, which confirms established social settings and linkages among the core actors. Public relations campaigns can spin isolated events, but raw network topology establishes a quantifiable operational link that press statements cannot erase. Mapping available connections only accounts for the visible half of the archive. To complete the framework, analysts must establish a taxonomy of information the government actively suppressed. Standard procedure involves micro-reductions, the routine surgical removal of personally identifiable information to protect innocent parties. Macro-redaction operates differently. It is the weaponized suppression of documents, designed to obscure entire structural narratives rather than protect individual privacy. The most egregious example of macro-redaction in the entire data dump physically originated from this New York judicial jurisdiction. Deep within the archives sits a 119-page Grand Jury NY document. Every single page is heavily and intentionally blacked out, containing zero readable data. Including entirely macro-redacted files in a public release serves strictly as transparency theater. It intentionally inflates page counts to simulate disclosure, while actively withholding the empirical truth. Beyond heavy redactions, analysts identified a second, far more insidious method of archival curation: covert deletion. This digital repository grid tracks a timeline anomaly where 16 files were quietly scrubbed from the DOJ servers almost immediately after release. Investigators quickly isolated the most critical missing artifact from this deletion event. Internally, it was cataloged as File 468. The contents of that deleted file were heavily documented elsewhere. It was the widely known photograph showing Donald Trump alongside Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. The government claimed the 3.5 million pages were just accidentally disorganized. The surgical precision required to locate and remove specific photographs post-release directly contradicts that defense. Targeted visual deletions reveal deliberate curatorial intent. They prove the archive was a carefully managed presentation, rather than a raw, transparent data dump. To see the true scope of the cover-up, analysts combine these two distinct workflows, the network entity mapping and the redaction taxonomy, into a single, unified model. This complete node network visualizes the known sociopolitical graph, loaded and ready to ingest the missing variables. By introducing the suppressed data as null variables, they map precisely into the existing schema, forcefully recalculating the weight of the surrounding connections. When researchers mathematically chart the dimensions of missing data, they define the specific structural boundaries of the cover-up, narrowing down the network zones being actively protected. Systematic, community-driven database structuring provides the only valid countermeasure to this level of state-sponsored obfuscation. The truth exists at the intersection of visible nodes and the specific structural geometry of the remaining voids.
For years, the internet waited for a single piece of paper. The working theory was that somewhere in the dark, a neat, alphabetized document existed that could expose the most powerful people on Earth. But the Department of Justice release offered no such clarity. Instead, the public received a chaotic dump of 3.5 million pages of heavily redacted, disorganized legal documents. Hiding a truth often involves more than just destroying it. By drowning information in noise, burying the relevant facts under a mountain of paperwork, a bureaucratic smokescreen can exhaust even the most diligent investigators. This massive release created an informational vacuum, but rather than walking away, thousands of civilians stepped in to conduct their own investigation. To understand the fixation on finding a client list, psychologists at Northeastern University look at how we process information during times of crisis. In an era of profound societal distrust, we crave clarity. We look for a neat list of villains we can easily identify and lock away. This desire for a simple Hollywood-style narrative helps maintain the illusion that the world can be easily ordered and made safe again. This deep-seated need for a conspiracy blinded us to the horrifying reality hidden within those 3.5 million pages. It required a new approach to the data to see what was actually there. A data engineer operating as Eric Keller II led an army of internet sleuths who refused to be overwhelmed by the DOJ dump. They launched an open-source platform called Epstein Exposed, built specifically to organize the government's disorganized data. This 3D network graph shows AI tools cross-referencing 2.1 million scattered documents into coherent clusters. The system tracked 3,652 individual flight records and identified over 51,000 human connections by automatically unredacting sloppy blackouts. The AI-driven civilian machine mapped the entire network in plain sight, uncovering the patterns buried within the government's disorganized release. With the network mapped, the focus shifted toward a forensic tracking of physical movements. The logs placed specific individuals on exact flights directly linked to the operation. These records traced a path to the isolated, heavily fortified locations where the crimes occurred. The network extended into high-profile domestic properties, like this Palm Beach mansion, hiding in plain sight. As the geographic data became clear, the public was forced to confront the grim physical reality of the unsealed files. When political scapegoats and celebrity gossip are stripped away, the files contain the harrowing testimonies of actual survivors. The unsealed depositions from victims like Johanna Schoberg and staff like Juana Lessi outline a terrifying daily reality. This was an industrial, systemic human trafficking machine that operated behind an untouchable public facade. Wealth and legal loopholes protected this machine for decades, allowing it to function with relative impunity. The documents suggest the most effective part of the network wasn't the secrecy, but the institutional failure that allowed the system to persist. Ultimately, the unsealed files act as a mirror, reflecting our own societal priorities back at us. While elites fought to keep the shadows dark, the truth is now permanently scattered across millions of pages, waiting to be read. By obsessing over unmasking the powerful, we often fail to acknowledge the individuals who actually needed our attention. In our relentless hunt for villains, we completely forgot to look for the faces of the powerless victims. Justice requires a shift in focus, moving from sensational conspiracies towards dismantling the actual structures that enable systemic abuse.